Well, hi there. This is Anu, and today I am so excited to be speaking with my friend and now brother, Elliott Connie. And if you don't know who he is, first of all, you have to check out the 4 books he's written about healing, about really coming to home within ourselves and our experiences. But beyond the books, he's a psychotherapist that practices in Texas. He's the host of a very popular daily podcast called The Aha Moments. And he's worked with thousands of individuals, couples, families, applying the solutions focused approach to help them move their lives and the problems they face towards a desired future. So, welcome, Elliot. And thank you for
Thank
being
you.
here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, one of the things I wanted to really start out our conversation with is, what made you want to say yes to joining the Breaking Bias Summit?
I think, well, a couple of things. Number one, you personally, I was introduced you, and I like you, and I love the work that you do.
Oh,
But I think biases should be broken. I think that um, biases contribute to some of the negative human experiences that we have, and anything I could do to disrupt that, I am very excited to do.
thank you. Yeah, I'm so grateful that you did say yes because whenever I watch you on social media or listen to your podcast, there's like this sense of beacon of hope that I get from you. But
Mm,
I'd love to learn a little bit about your story. And I think I shared this with you. Like for me, breaking bias is quite personal because
yeah.
15 years ago, I was in the bouts of depression and anxiety and suicidality, even attempted to take my life. And, it was because I started believing all the stories and ideas um, that I experienced around bias. And, sometimes I reflect on, wow, like that was me. And this is me now. And it's that same human pre and post. Um, so I'd love to like learn a little bit about your story, outside the bios and the accomplishments and all the amazing things you've done. You just shared that you were on the Breakfast Club again, which is
Yeah.
so cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, so how did you come to this work of healing and psychotherapy and writing books? And yeah, who is Elliot beyond the words?
Yeah. This work is very personal to me. Um,
Mm,
I grew up with a lot of anxiety and depression. I
mm,
grew up with extraordinarily low self-value, self-worth, and self-esteem. Um, I contemplated taking my life continuously for
mm,
years and years and years. And the reason I that was my lived experience was my father was a very angry, abusive man, both
mm.
physically and emotionally. And I had so much hope
Yeah.
that life would be different at every stage of life. Like I kept trying to please him, and I just thought if I could be more successful athletically, if I could be a better student, he would treat me better. And it never really came to fruition. And I started to feel like, and the best way I describe it to people, like if this was life, and I saw other people get dealt a different life, and I got dealt this one, I just didn't want this.
Mm,
I didn't see a way around it. And I remember the moment I realized, like, I'm literally deciding I'm going to take my life. Um, I was in college, so I had this belief that if I could just get out of my house,
mm,
then I could be safe and I could grow and I could start like becoming a human. So that was my goal, is like to get out of my home.
mm,
I was a really good baseball player in college, and knew I was going to have the opportunity to play baseball in college. I mean, I'm
mm.
sorry, really good baseball player in high school, and I knew I
Yeah.
was going to have the opportunity to play baseball in college. And I thought if I can go to a college campus and move on a college dorm, I would be safe from my father's wrath. And
Mm,
I remember, just to date myself a little bit, right before I went away to college, I got a beeper. Now,
I remember those.
younger people might not remember, but there used to be a device
Yes.
that if you wanted to get a hold of somebody, because there's no mobile phones, you could beep them, and this device would beep, and then you would know to call that person back. Like whoever was beeping you, their phone number would show up in your beeper, and you can call that person back. So I got a beeper, and I moved onto the college campus, and my father would beep me, and like constantly
Wow.
beep me, and he would call my professors at the university. And I felt like the torture followed me. And that was the moment I lost hope. That was the moment I thought,
Wow.
like, my last hope was moving out of that house. And now I've successfully done it. I moved out of the house. I moved to a college campus about 3 hours away from my house, maybe 90 minutes, whatever it
Wow.
was, 3 hours, I can't remember. And he had found a way to torture me long distance. And
Yeah.
sometimes he would even just show up on my college campus just to show me that he had
Yeah.
control over me. And
Wow.
I decided to take my life. And I tell people, like, I wasn't thinking about it. I wasn't maybe, like, I decided to take my life. And then
Yeah.
one day I was laying in my bed, and there are times when I feel like a message is coming from you or to you
Yeah.
from a sacred place.
Mhm.
I call that sacred place God. Some people might call that sacred place the universe. Whatever it is,
Yes.
a sacred place is talking to you. And this was a moment where I knew a message had just been delivered to me. And I was laying in my dorm room. I knew I had days, maybe a few weeks to live, because I was really,
Wow.
really, I'm not going to be here much longer. And
Wow.
I was giving away things to my friends. I was like, hey, you can
Oh
have
my
this.
goodness.
They didn't know that I was giving it away because I knew I wasn't going to need it long. Like, that's how close I was. And on this day, I was laying in my dorm room, and I started thinking about my eulogy. I started thinking about my friends attending my funeral and standing behind a podium and talking about their friend Elliott. And I thought they would say things like, I didn't know Elliott's mental health was a struggle. I didn't know Elliott was sad. I didn't know Elliott was this depressed. And for whatever reason, I found that intolerable, because what I wanted them to say was, I didn't know Elliott's father was this bad. I wanted them to blame him for my demise. Like, I didn't want them to blame me. I didn't want them to talk about this if there was something wrong with me. I wanted them to talk about there's something wrong with him. And Elliott just couldn't carry the torture anymore. And in that moment, I decided, and I was 19 when this happened. I was laying in my dorm room, and I had that thought. And I said, because I find this intolerable, I really only have one choice.
Wow.
I have to outlive this pain so I could tell the story.
Wow.
I need to outlive how terrible this is so people could know the truth about what is happening in my life.
Wow.
And a very strange thing happened literally instantaneously when I made that decision. The first thing that I noticed was I became infinitely stronger, because once I made the decision that I have to outlive this pain, I had accidentally activated my internal resilience,
Yes.
which every human being has. But
Yes.
it took that moment for me to, like, tap into it, because in order to live, I had to be resilient. The other thing it made me do is it gave me hope, because just having the thought that I want to outlive this pain means I now have hope that there will be a day after the pain.
Yes.
The other thing that happened, to my absolute surprise, is the depression and anxiety immediately went away. Like, I woke up the next
Wow.
day for the very first time in a time that I could remember. And I remember this. Like, I remember waking up on my campus and thinking to myself, I don't have a pit in my stomach. I don't have that, like, I'm on the cusp of tears.
Yeah.
Like, literally, I'd spent 24/7, 365 for a long time feeling those things, and simply making the decision to outlive my pain, instantaneously those things went away. And the other thing I remember was, I didn't know, and I found this to be incredibly exciting. I didn't know what life was going to lead me to.
Yeah.
And I got really excited because now life became a process of discovery. So if I'm no longer living to please this man, if I'm no longer living in the throes of depression and anxiety, what
Wow.
is life?
Yeah.
I didn't know the answer to that question, but I was so excited to figure it out.
Wow.
I wanted to know if this guy who was beating me and telling me that I was a horrible person and I was never going to amount to anything, I needed to discover, was he correct?
Yeah.
So, like, what is life? What am I capable of being? And if he's wrong, then it'll be really cool to try to discover if he's wrong about that, then maybe he's wrong about everything. And I just get to discover who Elliott is. And I started working harder in class, and I started getting better grades and taking care of myself more healthily and showing up in my relationships differently. And it completely changed my life. And
Oh my
I
God.
realized that I know this is going to sound hyperbolic, maybe even arrogant, but I felt like I had like cracked some code of life. I felt like, certainly in my life, like, I don't know, like I just felt like I'd like cracked
Yes.
some code. Like
Yeah.
all of a sudden I can smile and I can laugh. It was hard. I had to use my strength to stand up to my father and give him certain boundaries. And as a consequence, we haven't spoken in over 20 years. I actually just saw him for the first time a couple of months ago. Um,
Wow.
but it wasn't easy. I don't mean to give that impression, but it
Hmm.
was significant. And at the time, I was a marine biology major, and I didn't care about school because I didn't think I had a future, and I was only in college to play baseball. But all of a sudden, I was like, man, maybe this stuff has a greater purpose. And
Yeah.
I started trying harder, and I went and talked to my advisor and told her about the massive transformation I just experienced, and told her I wanted my life to have meaning and purpose.
Yeah.
And I ended up changing my major to psychology.
Yes.
And that was the moment, I think I realized, if my life needs to have a purpose, I wanted to touch other people's lives who might be struggling. I
Yes.
realized in that moment that suffering is unnecessary.
Yes.
Circumstances we don't have any control over.
Right.
But to a large degree, suffering is unnecessary, and I wanted to help people no longer suffer. So that was the journey of what led me to being a psychotherapist, why I love it so much to this day.
Oh my goodness. Well, first of all, thank you for sharing that, and also, what a gift to us all that you had that moment of grace and you built that inner strength. And yeah, there's just so much resonance when I was listening to you because I too had a very troubled relationship with my father for most of my life, very
Mm.
much like yours. And as I reflect on it, my mental health challenges were partially due to that. So, and like you, like I didn't speak to him for years, and it'd be so funny. I would go back home and he would be there, and I would just not talk to him. I was there to see my mom, and that's it.
Mm.
Um, but one thing I wanted to really we're talking about breaking bias, and of course, you were able to break so many of your internalized biases. These
Mm.
lies that you had believed at an unconscious or a conscious level through your father, but just kind of pierce through them. But one thing that I think is going to be resonating with so many of our listeners and viewers is that your story is not unique,
No.
particularly for those of us who are men. You know what? I'd love for you to as a psychotherapist, as someone who's worked with thousands of people, what's going on with people like our fathers?
You know, I
And I
I
want
have
to add one thing, that both your father and my father are also men of color.
yeah,
Your father, likely a black person, a black man, my
black
father, a
man.
brown man, immigrant man, English as a second language, all those things.
I think there are several answers to that question. I think number one, especially in communities of color, there's a lot of unresolved trauma
Mm,
that we carry, and we pass it down generationally. Um, and now the kids carry it, and then they do the same thing. So I think in a culture, in society in general, there's a lot of unresolved trauma, but I think that is exponentially higher in communities of color and communities that have dealt with bias,
yeah.
bigotry, oppression, those sorts of things. I think the other thing is I don't know that men are always taught the appropriate way to love. And I don't believe my father knew how to love. I think
Mhm.
if you had asked my father at that time, he would have told you I was pushing him and I was trying to build him up and I was trying to make him a man. But he literally almost killed me. Like, it was literally
Yeah.
almost to my demise. So I think men are not always encouraged to be loving creatures. We're encouraged to be strong protectors, providers. But to be loving is a
Yeah.
very, very different thing. And I just think that's my father has a very specific trauma that happened to him. That's kind of his story, so I'll let him tell it. But
Yeah.
he never resolved it. And
Yes.
when you have these things that happen to you, I think it harms a part of your heart
Yeah.
and creates a difficulty for you to love appropriately going forward.
Thank you for sharing that. And, it's so resonant that, because of the structures that were born in, men are not trained how to love. And oftentimes people like your father and my father weren't loved themselves. They've
Correct.
just like never felt love. And when I reflect on that, sometimes there's so much like lack of safety in one's being, you
Correct. I
know?
think that's absolutely true. If you've never felt loved, then that means inherently you've never felt emotionally safe.
Yes.
And if you've never felt emotionally safe, then how can you provide an environment of emotional
Yeah.
safety?
Yeah.
Um, and I think what I hope, you mentioned books. I've written 5, by the way, not 4.
5. I'm so sorry I missed
No,
one.
no, that's okay. My 6th is coming out pretty soon. Um,
Woo!
if I would love to make this world a more loving place.
Yes.
Like, if you and think of the society we live in, right? If someone said, Elliot, how was your day? If I said, man, my day was great. Um, I hugged 3 people and I made 5 people
Mm,
smile.
yeah.
I don't know that people would praise me as much if somebody said, Elliot, how was your day? If I said, oh, my day was great. I sold, 1,000 books
Right.
and I made $1 million and I paid off my car, right?
Yeah.
We praise those things, but actually making people smile
Yes.
and giving a person who's struggling a hug has a far greater impact
Yes.
than any of those other things that we tend to celebrate more.
Yes. I mean, this is partially why I started this work of breaking bias, because I was doing it within myself. And one thing that's inspired me all these years is Dr. King's quote, our goal is to build a beloved community.
Correct.
And this will require qualitative changes in our souls and quantitative changes in our lives. And that's what we're talking about. Like, how do we build a more loving world? And part of what I'm hearing from you is, in order for us to build a loving world out there, one that's more compassionate and equitable and just, we have to start with building a loving world within ourselves.
Yes. Yes. But that's really hard. Like, the first act of self-love that I ever did,
Yes.
I think prior to that moment that I described in my dorm room, I don't think I ever did anything for self-love. I did things for just self-protection. For example, I was a really good athlete. I played football, baseball, and basketball as a kid. And that meant I was out of my house at practice almost year round because those seasonal
Yeah.
sports surrounded the whole year. So
Yeah.
I wasn't doing those things out of love. I was doing those things out of protection. They kept me out of the environment where I felt unsafe.
Sure.
The first act of self-love I ever did was after I had that realization, like, all right, I'm going to outlive this pain. I became aware of what the threat was to my life in a more acute way.
Yeah.
And I called my father and I said, I need for you to hear me say what I'm about to say.
Mm.
I need to live in a world where I'm not being hit, called names, yelled at, or cursed at. I
Wow.
can deal with everything else, but I need those 4 things to not exist in my life.
Yes.
And he said, F you, and hung up the phone.
Yes.
And I said, okay, you've just demonstrated you can't follow these 4 rules. You just broke one.
Mm.
So again, I'm going to date myself. We used to have these things called answering machines.
Yes, we did. 2 phones that were connected to the wall.
Yes, exactly. And my father was traveling when I called him and made that request, so I knew he wasn't home. So he said, F you, and he hung up the phone. So I called his home phone, and I left a message on his answering machine that said, you are not welcome in my life until you can follow one of these 4, all 4 of these rules. I love you, and I want you in my life, but I also have to love me. And I know that it is not healthy for me to have those 4 things happening. So when you can follow those rules, please give me a call.
Amen.
He called my younger brother the next day and told my younger brother that I will respect Elliott's wishes and not call him. And I was devastated.
Wow.
I was like, that's not what I said. I didn't ask you to not call me. I just asked you to not break those 4 rules.
Yes.
And I thought, how crazy is it that he'd rather not talk to me
Yes.
than follow these 4 basic rules.
Basic rules.
And I didn't talk to him for over 20 years.
Wow.
He has chosen, even to this day, he's never called me to. I saw him about a month ago at my niece's, my younger brother's daughter's basketball game. My father was there, and I just saw him, and he came and gave me a hug and said, hi, son. And I was like, hello. like we haven't spoken. But he still has not accepted that he must follow those rules. That was the first act of self-love, and it was one of the hardest things I ever did. And the reason I share that is because we think of love as this like amazing, like great thing, and it is. It's both amazing and great, but it also sometimes forces you to do the hardest stuff that you could ever possibly do in your life.
Yes.
And for me, I had to stand up to my torturer and reclaim my life. And the way I did that was by asking him not to do those things. And he, of course, said he broke one of the rules right away. And I was in that moment. It's like, am I strong enough to follow through with what I said? And my life has gotten better since that moment. Literally, like it just keeps going up. Because that was the moment I started to love me. And as you've already said, which I agree with, I can't distribute love if I can't manufacture it within myself.
Yes. No, it's such a powerful story. And I mean, it's not story, it's an ongoing lived experience and has been. And, one thing that, there are 2 things that this raises for me. First is, what happened on that day when you were imagining, your own eulogy and your funeral? What was that transformation that gave you the strength to stand up to your torturer, to overcome possibly, a lifetime of, just all the negativity that you were surrounded by, and also the physical and emotional, psychological abuse that you had experienced in your body? Like, I would love to kind of share, I would love to learn a little bit, like, what were the tools, the skills that maybe you were already building, but you didn't know prior to that moment, around breaking that bias, and kind of piercing through. And then secondly, like, I'd love to kind of for you to share what this most recent encounter with your father was.
Yeah.
And, why, what did you learn from that? Because what I've seen is that, one of the famous quotes that I love, I think it's Maya Angelou, is when people show you who they are, believe them.
Believe them the first time.
Yeah, first time. Exactly. And when people are hateful and hurtful, it has nothing to do with you.
No.
Like when my father would say all these mean things to me, that has nothing to do with me, because he ain't seeing me for who I am. That has 100% to do with what he believes, oftentimes about himself.
Correct.
That he's projecting onto me. And we're seeing this, we see this in our workplaces, our politics, our families, our communities as well. But how do we make that shift to like not believe the lies? How did you do it? And
like the thing, like I can remember it, like I can sit here right now and just imagine laying in that dorm room on that college campus, man. And I think the thing that happened immediately for me, the transformation began when I realized my story is my calling. and my story is something to be proud of.
Yeah.
I did not know that, like, the last physical altercation I had with my father, I was 19 years old. So I didn't know that enduring all of that also made me incredibly strong. It also made me incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
I was only, my lived experience was only that of depression, but all of a sudden I realized, wait, I've endured pain and struggle, and I ended up in college around all of the people that I thought had a better life than me.
Yes.
So all of a sudden I started thinking of myself in a positive way
Yes.
for the first time. And I would say one tool we have to have, all of us, is we have to accept that we are not perfect. There is no perfect person on the planet. So that means we have to accept we have flaws. We carry flaws, all of us.
Yes.
But our duty, if we want to have strong mental health and live a positive life, is to not focus on our flaws. Like, since they're always there, just let them be.
Yes.
It's actually to discover what your strengths are and what your talents are. And in that moment, I realized I'm actually a very strong individual. I thought I was weak because I never fought back. Like, I just took it. For all those years, I just took it, which I perceived as weak. But all of a sudden, I
Yes.
thought, no, the fact that I'm still alive, the fact that I'm still here, I'm actually very, very strong. And
Yes.
once you change what you see when you look at yourself, your life has no choice but to get better. And I remember having that thought. I remember laying in that dorm room, realizing, like, all right, if I'm gonna outlive this pain, there's certain things I'm gonna have to do. There's certain things I'm gonna have to, like, focus on. And in a moment, it just shifted. Like, all of a sudden, I don't feel weak. I feel powerful. I feel strong. I feel resilient. I felt for the first time in my life, I felt like I was better than my peers. And I don't mean to say that arrogantly. I hope people hear me say that and they understand what I'm
No.
saying. Because my whole life, I looked at everybody around me and I thought they were better than me. And I thought their lives were better than me. And the
Yes.
first time I looked around and I thought, you know what? All of us are at a pretty cool like college experience here.
Yes.
And you guys came from affluent families, and you came from two parent homes, and your families love on you, and I got here while I was being tormented every step of the way. And all of a sudden I had pride. I just thought, maybe I'm not this great, like, this unlovable, unvaluable,
Yes.
useless being. Maybe I'm strong. Maybe I'm something else. And that was, my life's never been the same since. Like, I can't stress enough how powerful it is when you start realizing there's a hidden thing
Yes.
here that's been happening here.
You know, it's so beautiful that you've shared all, your journey around all of this. Because, in the book, in Breaking Bias, I talk about, well, what are, scientists have been working on this for about 3-4 decades. Like, how do we really change behavior, particularly our behavior towards ourselves and others? And they've come up with 5 tools known as PRISM. And it really starts with perspective taking. It starts with mindfulness, which is the M in there, which is awareness, which is where the realization came. But then moving into stereotype replacement, which is the S, which is that reframing, that you started doing. It's like, oh yeah, like, I may have received this all my life, but it doesn't have to be this way. There are other possibilities.
Yeah.
And then going deeper into curiosity, which is individuation, to those words you mentioned: resilient, strong, powerful, courage, love. These are the pro-social behaviors to move it to perspective taking and imagining what life could and would be like if we kind of cut off these unskillful and unwholesome thoughts and beliefs about ourselves. So really, like, kudos, and everything that I've known about you now makes so much more sense.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true, man. I think, and I'll give you a real, like, a real life example of changing how you view yourself. At that time in college, I was a solid C student. like not anything to be proud of or write home about. And I would beat myself up. And one of the things my father used to tell me was I was stupid. And he used to tell me that I was lazy. And he used to tell me you don't work hard. He used to say all these things to me. And my C average was confirmation that my father was correct.
Yes.
Until I noticed something. And it was a small something, but it made a massive difference in my life. And what I noticed was I don't come from a family with a ton of money. So there were times where I couldn't afford the books for my classes. So what I would have to do was I would have to go to the library and study like the class book that all my peers had gone and purchased.
Mm-hmm.
I'd have to go to the library and find that book. Now, oftentimes, the book the professor wanted us to use was like the 4th edition, blah,
Yes,
blah, whatever.
I remember that. Yes.
Right. And I would go to the library, and the library didn't have the 4th edition. They had the 2nd edition. So I would have to study whatever the library had available to me. And oftentimes, those newer editions had more information, and that was information on the test that I did not have access to.
Yeah.
So then when I noticed that, I realized I'm now quite proud of my C's because these other students are getting A's and B's, but they were able to study the book the professor gave.
Yeah.
They didn't have to go to the library. They didn't have to do all the stuff I was doing. So all of a sudden I started thinking to myself, 2 really important thoughts. What grades would I be getting if I were in their circumstances and I had full access to the books the professors were telling us to get? But more importantly, what grades would they be getting if they were in my circumstances when they did not have access to the resources the professor was asking us to acquire? And I started thinking, maybe I'm doing pretty okay given the circumstances that I was functioning in. And that thought, it just completely changed my life. Like in a way that if we sat and talked for 1,000 hours, I'm not sure I could articulate the impact that those thoughts had on me. Like it just completely transformed how I viewed myself. And when you transform how you view yourself, to your point of those prisms, when you transform how you view yourself, you transform how you behave. You transform how you treat yourself. You transform how you treat other people. Like life literally cannot be the same. And I experienced that at 19 in the most profound, powerful way I can ever express.
How did that actually, this breakthrough that you experienced, how did that shift your relationships with, your friends, your other family members, your cousins? What did you notice begin to shift, if anything?
Well, first thing, and a huge core value of mine is appreciation. So I started being very appreciative of all of the people around me. And I remain that way to this very, very day. I'm very grateful to all of the people in my life. I realize that they don't have to be. And I just value that in a huge way. I think the other thing is I became much more emotionally expressive. My friends will tell you that I'll just tell them I love them because I don't ever want anybody close to me to live on this planet without knowing how much I value them and how much I love them. And I believe very much like tell your friends you love them, make it awkward. I don't care. Just like love on people. And I don't know that I thought either of those two things before that moment, but now those are huge core values of mine. I express appreciation and I truly value and experience appreciation. My relationships with my friends and my family only strengthened because I realized I just want to be such a connective tissue and share my love and appreciation for everybody around.
Thank you for that. And I have like 2 kind of follow-ups. Like the first one is, when did love become awkward? Why is loving on people awkward? And how do we make it sexy again?
Man, that's a good question. I don't know. But we live in a society where if okay, I'll give you an example. I did a training recently and I was teaching people how to do the kind of psychotherapy that I'm very well known for with
Yes.
couples.
Mm.
And I was showing a video of me doing a therapy session, and this couple started describing falling back in love with one another. And they were saying, like, we'd wake up the next day and we would kiss and we would hold each other and we would make love. And someone in the audience said, "This is awkward." And I thought, how on earth is this awkward? This is a couple talking about rediscovering love. I think it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. But what
Yeah.
annoys me is if I show a video of a couple like going at it, arguing and fighting in the middle of a therapy session, no one says that this is awkward. We've somehow normalized hate and anger, and we've made connection and love like this inappropriate thing.
Yeah.
And I don't think it should be that way. I think we should normalize love. I think the world would be
Amen.
far better served if we were better
Amen.
at giving hugs versus throwing punches.
Amen. And that's the work of breaking bias, right? Breaking biases, which really begin from ourselves, like expecting from ourselves that we're lovable.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. 100%.
Yeah. And then like, so this is so beautiful in terms of like the transformation of relationships. But I know that you work a lot in this realm of trauma,
Yes.
and particularly as Black and brown people with other marginalized identities, and even like people like white folks and straight folks, all of us have traumas,
We all have
right?
trauma.
In some shape or form. What I want to kind of, it's not, because I don't know if you have an answer, but just some thoughts on this idea of intergenerational trauma, historical trauma, that we have experienced, for me as someone from whose family's from India, this era of colonization and the brutality of British colonization, and how it split up our country, in multiple pieces, and those the wounds of that remain to this day across the subcontinent, affecting 1.78 billion people. Similarly, in our country, in the U.S., enslavement, Jim Crow, right? Just Chinese exclusion, you name it.
Yep.
How has that shown up, for you in your life and or your clients? And then how do you use those same tools to kind of tackle? I think it's very similar, but I'd love for you to comment.
Yeah. Well, first of all, that touches me. Like having a conversation about this particular topic, I think is super important. For what it's worth, I've been to India 3 times.
Ooh.
I went to a place called Calicut twice, and I went to a place called Bangalore.
Yeah.
And
all South India. Yeah, beautiful places.
Yeah, and I was able to observe like the caste system, even though it's no longer legal, the impact of it is still very much
Yes.
overt. Like you can tell and you can see it. And living in America as an African American, I am the descendant of slaves. I'm a descendant of captured people. And one of the ways that I think that shows up, like just to give an example, I think it's hard in the African American community, it's hard to allow our children to dream and pursue their dreams, because previous generation of African Americans have had their dreams killed, and in some cases have been killed for their dreams.
Yes.
So what ends up happening is you might have a young kid that says, I want to become an astrophysicist. Like a young kid these days might see a video of Neil deGrasse Tyson and say, I want to become an astrophysicist. And their parents might say, no, you have to, I want you to get a stable job, and I want you to, go work, get a trade and become a plumber. Don't pursue this thing. And I think that we have to get better at that. I think we have to get better at facilitating the dreams of our youth, because I don't notice non-oppressed cultures doing that.
Exactly.
If a affluent Caucasian kid says, I want to become an astrophysicist, the system rallies around that person and encourages it.
Yeah.
But if an African American kid says it, their peers are going to say that sounds white. Somebody's going to tell them that that's nearly impossible, don't do it. Someone's going to tell them how risky it is. Someone's going to tell them how hard it is. And I think we have to get better at facilitating the dreams of youth. And I mean, there are lots of impacts of slavery in this country.
Yes.
But one of them, I think, is just allowing people to dream and pursue whatever that is freely and with encouragement. But I don't know that happens currently.
I think it's such a beautiful, an important call to action, particularly for, people of enslaved people, descendants of enslaved people, Black folks in the U.S. and around the world, but also any marginalized community.
Right.
This idea of dreams deferred no longer needs to be true, and really to let our kids dream big. And, one of the things I mentioned in my book, one of my professors in law school was Bryan Stevenson, kind of a leading civil rights
I have a funny story about him, actually.
Oh, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah.
But my story is that one of the saddest things he shared, and when I was a student of his, is in many of our communities around the country, particularly in inner cities that are predominantly Black and brown and impoverished, boys of color expect to go to prison as a rite of passage.
Correct.
That is the extent of their moral imagination for themselves. And as he was sharing that, I was like, wow, there were times in my life as an immigrant to the US, growing up in underfunded and underinvested schools, that was the option that was offered to me too.
Yeah. No, I think Bryan nails it. I think that's absolutely true. But think that's what I mean about dreaming. If we live in an environment where we see people get a certain age and go to prison, you just assume that that's part of life. In the same exact way that if you live in an environment and you see people go to college, you just assume that's just part of life. In the same exact way that if you live in an environment and you see people become professional athletes or musicians or whatever they become, you just assume that that's just a part of life. Yes. And in the Black communities, we assume that hardship is just a part of life.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be. Like, one of the saddest parts, so I'll tell you my story about Bryan Stevenson. I have a colleague, his name is Adam. He is white. He's one of my closest friends. I love him dearly. He is a great human being. I love him and his family. We're as close can be. And one day, Adam and I started having a conversation, and we asked ourselves, do we think society, in particularly the psychotherapy community at the time, but society at large, has learned its lesson from the civil rights movement? And we decided that they had not.
Yes.
So we rented a car and we drove across the American South and recorded our journey. We went to Little Rock, Arkansas, where Central High School, where the Little Rock 9 integrated those school system. We went to Memphis, Tennessee, where Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. We went to Jackson, Mississippi, where Medgar Evers was assassinated. We went to all these places. The saddest place I've ever been in my whole life is in Mississippi, a place called Glendora, Mississippi. Now, most people have no idea what Glendora, Mississippi is. It's this tiny, 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 tiny town. But why Glendora, Mississippi needs to be a place that every single person needs to know is Glendora, Mississippi is the place where Emmett Till was lynched and lost his life. And we went there, and it was the only place that Adam or I had ever been where you literally just see hopelessness in the eyes of the people in that community.
Yeah.
And the reason, and the people in that community, the only way I can describe it is like a lack of ambition.
Yeah.
They live a very rural, it's almost like going back in time. Like, if you've never been there, most people haven't, it's very hard to describe.
Yeah.
But when you dig deeper, and we interviewed residents of Glendora, Mississippi, including the mayor, and you realize that one of the reasons ambition is not prominent in Glendora, Mississippi, is because 75 years ago at this point, I guess, there was a black kid in that community that was outgoing and ambitious and charismatic, and they killed him.
They killed him.
They killed him.
They killed
So
him.
the community learned, when you're out ambitious and charismatic and funny and have a big personality, it is to your detriment. So what happens is parents start trying to rid their children of that trait.
Yes.
They want their children to be safe.
Yes.
They want their children to thrive. So what happens when you see a funny, charismatic kid get murdered and your kid is a class clown? You tell your kid, stop doing that.
Stop doing that.
You tell your kid to stop flirting, and you tell your kid to stop dancing, and you tell your kid to stop being bold and stop being loud and stop getting attention. You want your child to stop doing that. So now, in 2024, if you go to Glendora, Mississippi, you see the generations that have been raised with that trait being removed from them. And it's an incredibly sad experience to be. And I want people to understand, like, that is the consequence of racism. That is the consequence of oppression, is we take beautiful traits out of these people and we try to extinct them. And we need to let them flourish. Now, here's how the funny story I have about Bryan Stevenson is, on that same trip, we went to Montgomery, Alabama, where he has a museum.
Beautiful place, yeah.
And I said to my friend, we went to his museum and we walked around, and it's a beautiful place. He also has a memorial, a lynching memorial that will absolutely take your breath away if you've never been.
It's a pilgrimage for every American.
Every American needs to go there.
Yes.
Every American needs to go there.
Yeah.
And we're at his museum and we're walking around, and I said to my buddy, I said, I really want to meet. I mean, we'd been to Selma, we'd been everywhere, but now we're here, and I said, I want to meet Bryan Stevenson. And we walk out of the museum, and every site we went to, we would record. So we're recording in front of the museum, and the security guard told us to move. You can't record in front of the museum. So we moved to the parking lot, and I'm doing my recording, and out of the corner of my eye, I see a guy walking, and all I see, so this is just after COVID, so he's wearing a mask, and he's walking down the street. And I said to my buddy, I said, I think that's him. And I ran and chased him. And I said, man, you're probably going to be surprised by this, but me and my psychotherapist friend were making videos, blah, blah, blah. Can we interview you? And he allowed us. He said, I really don't like showing up on social media, but I'll let you ask me a few questions. So we have this recording of us talking to Bryan Stevenson the day we were in Montgomery, Alabama.
Oh my God. And he's just so gracious, right?
He is. He is absolutely a wonderful, gracious human being.
And he talks about that despair. You know, there's a book that I read, it's been over a decade. I wonder if they've changed the name since, Dr. Joy DeGruy, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome.
Oh, wow.
Right?
I haven't heard of this.
She's based out of Oregon. I'm not sure if she's still there, but she literally, what you've described, she has traced that as character traits that have become infested within Black communities, not just in the US, but around the world, out of fear, intergenerational fear and historical fears that have happened. So there is, as human beings, there is reason for it, because folks want to survive. The fight, flight,
that's right.
Gets triggered in their bodies, and they want to protect their kids.
That's right.
And
I understand it, by the way. Like, if I lived in Glendora, so according to reports, and I talked to people who were actually there, the mayor of Glendora, Mississippi, is the son of the man that was accused of helping the white lynch mob find Emmett Till's house. So I was talking to people that were actually there, and according to reports, Emmett Till whistled at this woman, and he was just a funny, carefree kid.
Yeah.
And then they murdered him. So if I were a parent in the 1950s when this happened, and I saw this take place, I would have to tell my kid, no whistling at people.
Yes.
I would have to tell my kid, you can't be carefree anymore.
Yes.
I would have to tell my kid, you can't be fun-loving anymore. I would have to beat that out of my child if necessary.
Yeah. Because
those things literally took someone's life right in front of us. And as a consequence, Glendora, Mississippi feels totally different than any other place on the planet.
I agree. I totally agree. And part of our work around breaking bias is to start speaking the truth and make this known to more and more people. When I worked in the South, like there's still places in the South, in Georgia and Mississippi and Alabama, where the Klan still marches. It's not just the South, actually, in Ohio, in Indiana, in every Sunday.
100%.
And they get permits for their parades.
That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true.
And if you're a person of color, if you're marginalized in any way, that's just like, oh, wow, like, can I really be who I am fully in this society?
That's absolutely true. Like, I've experienced that in my own profession. Like, maybe the most embarrassing thing about my life, and I really am ashamed of this. I really am embarrassed about this. When I became a psychotherapist, like I got my master's degree, and I started attending conferences. And I decided I wanted to fit in. So I would call my colleague Adam and I would ask him, what are you going to wear to this conference? And he would say, slacks, a polo shirt. And I'd be like, cool, because I wanted to be accepted. Yeah. So I would put on what I thought was the uniform.
Yeah.
And it didn't work because I didn't realize that they didn't want to accept me. It didn't matter what I wore. The status quo in my field, which is heavily Caucasian, they didn't want to accept a black guy. And then when I wrote a book and I started giving lectures, I would show up wearing the uniform.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to be accepted. And it dawned on me, they're not going to accept me. Yeah. It doesn't really matter what I wear. Like, these people have zero desire to accept me.
Yeah.
And that thought made me say, you know what, then I can't play this game anymore. So I'm going to show up wearing what I would wear, the way I would dress as a person of color that comes from the inner city, that lives the life the way I want to, and they're just going to have to accept me or not. And that became my authentic truth, is I can't live their rules. I've got to live in my life. And it was a very, very powerful awakening for me.
Wow, it's just so beautiful to hear that, because part of it is you stopped caring about external validation.
Completely.
And you found the light within you, and you were like, I'm just going to shine my light as it is.
Yeah.
And see who comes. And now there are tens of thousands,
hundreds of
thousands, millions of people that are getting lit by the light that you're sharing, because they see the authenticity and the truth.
I think people gravitate towards truth.
Yes.
Even when it scares us, I think people gravitate towards truth. And I think, as men of color, like you and I, we have a sacred responsibility to tell the truth, even when it's scary.
Amen.
I think we have a sacred responsibility to tell the truth, even when it makes us and the hearer uncomfortable. Yes. Because what people don't realize is you and I have been uncomfortable consistently throughout our lives.
Yes.
So we don't walk through the world with the expectation of comfort.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's our duty to make you uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because we have to live in that space. So we have to tell you a truth that is going to make you uncomfortable, because it's a truth that has held us in uncomfort throughout our entire life journey. And I think that's a real responsibility we carry.
And I think that's the only way to build empathy, right? Because otherwise they're living in ideas of us, but they don't know what we're going through until they feel the discomfort in their body somatically. They're like, oh, now I get it. Maybe not fully, but I feel it in my body. And that's not cool.
No.
So I got to change my behavior, my words, my thoughts, my way of being. Because why? Because I love you.
Yes, because we should love our neighbor.
Yeah, exactly. I love you. And I've seen such transformation in so many of my friends, mentors, advisors who are not people of color, right? Who are not, gay, but they're like, oh, wait, I need to rethink this, because I don't want to harm you, because we are each other's relatives. We are each other's keepers, right? This has just been such a delight, Elliott. I mean, I'm just so grateful. First of all, I love you.
I love you back, bro.
Everything you stand for. There's a saying in like Buddhist philosophy that, lotus, which is a really beautiful, beautiful flower, blooms out of mud.
Oh, wow.
And I really feel like you are a lotus that's bloomed out of so much mud. But I was thinking, well, flowers actually close up, right? Over time, we lose them. So I was like, well, I think there's a better analogy for who you be in the world, which is you're a diamond. Because just as diamonds grow in coal, right? In some of the most like dirty spaces, you get this beautiful crystal that is hard as a rock, but just shines its light and delights everyone around. So thank you so much for being.
Thank
Do
you,
you have
man.
any closing thoughts, any calls to action for our listeners and our viewers?
Yeah, I would say two things.
Yes.
The first thing I would say is love yourself more than you criticize yourself. And the way to do that is to find strength within your story. And there's no such thing as a story without tragedy and trauma. There's equally no such thing as a story without strength. So I challenge everybody to find your strength within your story. The second thing I would say is give more love out into the world. And I'm going to tell you how you know when you're giving love. And you're giving love when you're more curious than you are judging. So when you see someone who's living a life different from you, when you see someone who's making decisions different from you, when you see someone who has a different value system different from you, asking them about their value system, their behaviors, their perspectives, as opposed to judging them for being different, is the first sign that you are giving love off into the world. I think we think of love as like hugging and kissing and all that stuff, but love is actually passionate curiosity. Like I don't have to accept everything about Anu. We're from very different places, so very likely we live different lives. But if I love him, I'm going to ask him about his perspective instead of judging him based upon what he does and or doesn't do. Like I grew up in Boston, Massachusetts, and he grew up wherever he grew up from an immigrant family from India. He's going to have different practices in his life than I have. And my duty as a loving creature is to be investigative about that as opposed to judging. So if you want to give love, be curious.
Wow. Thank you so much, Elliott. I mean, that's basically the road to breaking bias. And it begins right here with our favorite L word, love.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you all for listening and viewing, and stay tuned for more. And thank you so much, Elliott, for your incredible work. And I hope everyone reads all of the books, all 6 of them, the 6th one coming out soon.
6th one coming out soon. And find me on social media.
Yes.
At Elliott Speaks. Make sure you spell my name with 2 L's and 2 T's and follow me and stay engaged. I love it.
Amen. All right, you all. Thank you. Bye.